Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1143, and today's date is December 4th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we've been following this economy, and we've been tracking it, and we realize that as we continually track it, we're starting to see cracks in the illusion. Now, of course, the corporate media, the U.S. government, the central banks, they're continually keeping the illusion alive that everything is fine. But what we're starting to see is that we are seeing cracks in the entire system. Now, if you remember back to 2008, prior to that actually, people were leaving their homes in California because the interest rates, well, they started to move up. And many of the people had adjustable rate mortgages. They couldn't afford them. People were starting to lose jobs. And instead of trying to sell their houses because there were no buyers, they just left them. And we're starting to see something like this in Vancouver. And this is what I'm talking about. As we continue on here, we're going to see cracks in the economy. The illusion is going to start to fall apart. Remember, the administration that is in the United States right now is leaving. There's a new administration coming in, and they've set this up to completely collapse during the next administration. And we can see at this point that the corporate media, the U.S. government, they are building upon this illusion to make you believe the economy is fantastic. So when this administration leaves, they can say, you see, we had everything the way it was supposed to be. The globalists knew exactly how to take care of the economy, and look what happened. It completely crashed. But in Vancouver, what we're seeing, well, we're seeing the cracks. And the real estate in Vancouver, well, the home sales, they have plunged by 37.2% year over year. Sales for detached homes, down 52.2%. Sales of attached homes, down 40.9%. Condos are down 22.7%. And when you look and you drive around, you can see that houses are for sale. Angela Johnson, who's a contributor to Wolf Street, who's providing this information, well, they took some pictures. And what they found was that there are neighborhoods with for sale signs all over the place. And none of these houses are being sold. Just people are just trying to get rid of them. But the problem is there's no buyers. So we're starting to see cracks all over the place. Remember, we are hitting the top of the bubbles right now. Things are about to come down. And as we watch this and as we track this and as we report on this, we're going to see more cracks as we go into January. When the old administration leaves and the new administration comes in, the illusion is going to start to rip itself apart. We see Deutsche Bank right now. Well, we understand that they were going to pay a $38 million fine. It looks like the fine is up to $60 million. Now, the $38 million was for silver manipulation. The additional fine is for rigging gold and having that manipulated. Now, of course, a year ago, 2 years ago, this would have been considered fake news, where people were out there saying that gold and silver, it has been completely manipulated, actually going back further than that. But the corporate media, the U.S. government, they would have been out there saying that's completely fake, that is fake news, you have no proof whatsoever. And here today, the fake news turns out to be true. And the news that the corporate media and the government were putting out that there is no such thing as silver or gold, precious metal manipulation, well, that turned out to be fake news once again. Now, out in Venezuela, we're seeing that people are having a very difficult time getting cash. Many Venezuelans, they've had to go to multiple ATM machines just to get the currency they need. One person says it takes almost 6 minutes for it to spit out 3,500 bolivars at a shot. and they walk away with a huge stack, but it's really only worth $5.32. And what they're seeing there is hyperinflation at this point. It's very difficult to get the currency out of the ATM machines because it runs out very, very quickly. There's long lines to get food. There's long lines to get cash. And the situation is deteriorating very, very quickly. And this is a glimpse into what we're going to see as the system collapses. Now, the corporate media, they are setting the stage right now. And we can see that more and more stories are coming out telling us that the economy is fine. There's a story out of CNN, and the story starts off with Obama's gift to Trump, a solid economy. And they go through all the statistics, how they brought the unemployment down to 4.6%. The GDP growth expanded to 3.2%. The middle class is finally getting their pay raise. And they're going through all of this, trying to convince everyone that this economy is strong, it's robust. But again, these are statistical numbers. They're manipulated. And like we said before, we knew this is exactly what they were doing, because we pointed out that Obama never had a GDP above 3%. It just so happens at the end of his presidency, all of a sudden the numbers were completely revised, and he got his GDP above 3%. And they're playing on this, because what they're doing is they're setting the entire thing up for this great collapse. Jill Stein is still out there pushing the recount. This has nothing to do with the actual recount. What it has to do with is manipulating the electoral votes, stalling, trying to keep those electoral votes out of the count during December 19th. And we can see right now that the initial recount efforts in Pennsylvania, well, they're not going too well, and it looks like Jill Stein's party is dropping the court case seeking a statewide recount of Pennsylvania. And we see right now that during these recounts, well, they're not really showing that there was a major problem at all. Now, we're in day 2 in Wisconsin, and what we're seeing is the following. Clinton gained 89 votes but lost 86 for a net gain of 3 votes. Trump gained 98 votes but lost 92 for a net gain of 6. Clinton gained 3 overall. Trump gained 6 overall. So net Trump gain of 3 votes on day 2. And we can see right now it's not looking good for this entire recount. And we know this recount is a complete scam. What they're doing is they're using a backdoor method to show that no one got the electoral votes. Hillary didn't get the electoral votes. Trump didn't get the electoral votes. So right now, we need a decision of who is actually going to be the president. This is what they're trying to do. Now, on November 30th, the House quietly passed a bill targeting Russian propaganda websites, H.R. 6393, the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year of 2017. A quick skim of the bill reveals Title V, matters relating to foreign countries. Section 501 calls for government to counter active measures by Russia to exert covert influence, carried out in coordination with or at the behest of the political leaders or the security services of the Russian Federation, and the role of the Russian Federation has been hidden or not acknowledged publicly. The section lists the following definitions and media manipulation: establishment or funding of front groups, covert broadcasting, media manipulation, disinformation, and it goes on and on and on. And something very interesting coming out of Activist Post says, well, we notice how easy it is to see how this law, if passed by the Senate and signed by the President, could be used to target, threaten, or eliminate fake news websites. Now, we know there was a list that was created by Prop or Not, which is a website that is kind of shady in itself. They have no proof of anything. And we can see at this point, if we do get into some type of war with Russia, let's say, they could all of a sudden say these websites that are on the list, who were saying they're Russian propaganda websites, well, they've just committed treason. And we can see how they can take this to the next level. Now, curiously, the bill was passed on November 30th and was introduced on November 22nd, 2 days before the Washington Post published its November 24th article citing experts who claim Russian propaganda helped Donald Trump get elected. Now, we always know that they push these bills through with some type of an event, some type of article, something that can help it along. And this is exactly what we've seen with this. Now, coming out of Washington Blog, what we see is that, well, fake news has been around for thousands of years. And this is how governments usually stop fake news. For example, Socrates was killed in 399 BC for spreading fake news. His crime, failing to acknowledge the gods that the mainstream media of the day acknowledges. Was it really fake news? Or did the elite at that time didn't want that information out there? Galileo, in 1616 and 1633, was tried for spreading fake news. His crime, saying that the earth rotates around the sun. Completely fake. Benjamin Franklin, in 1773, was fired as a colonial postmaster general for spreading fake news. His crime, informing the American colonists about what the British were really doing. In 1933, the Nazis carried out numerous book burnings of fake news. The targeted authors: Einstein, Freud, Helen Keller, Jack London, Thomas Mann, and many others. The author's crime, their book, acts subversively on our future or strikes at the root of German thought, the German home, and the driving forces of our people. Mussolini had around 2,000 individuals killed for fake news. What was their crime? Opposing Mussolini. Stalin and the Soviet Union. Stalin handled the peddlers of fake news by murdering them or throwing them into insane asylums. CIA, 1972. Director Richard Helms said anyone spreading fake news would be labeled as a terrorist. Their crime, expressing a dissenting opinion. Popular TV personality Phil Donahue, he had a show, and it was canceled for spreading fake news. What was it? Well, he was questioning the Iraq War. Now we can see there is a race to erase fake news. Facebook has come up with a plan to push content produced by handpicked corporate media partners. And what they're saying is they're going to be picking stories that the corporate media is putting out there. And everything else most likely is going to be fake news. And they're going to have collections in the news feeds from these corporate media news outlets. And what they're trying to do, and this is coming from the top, the elite, the shadow government, they're trying to quiet the other voices. And we can see how governments, the elite, the shadow governments, we see how they quiet the individuals that are trying to spread the word of truth. They put them in jail, or they kill them, or they censor them, and they do whatever they have to do to quiet those voices so it doesn't interfere with their agendas. And that agenda is controlling the flow of information, controlling the people. Now, Obama, he is out there and he is likely to approve a 10-year extension of U.S. sanctions on Iran. And what's very interesting about all of this is the statement says, we believe the Iran Sanctions Act extension is not necessary, but we also believe it wouldn't interfere with the Iran deal. Now, the question is any sanctions at this point would interfere with the Iranian deal. And if you notice, they use the word believe. So they don't have facts here. They're just trying to convince everyone that, yeah, this is not going to be a problem. But of course, the Iranians are going to see this as a problem. Now, this is what they want to happen. Remember, we talked about what is happening right now, where they're trying to maneuver Trump into a huge problem with Iran. They already started with the missing radioactive material. They already reported that Iran cyber attacked Saudi Arabia. And now the U.S. is placing sanctions on Iran. And we'll see if Obama goes through with this, because at the time of the Iranian deal, he was saying no new sanctions, nothing like that. Remember, they don't want Iran developing a nuclear weapon because their plan was to go from Syria into Iran. Now, that plan, we can see, is not working out. So it looks like they're going back to sanctions and they're working on a new plan, but the goal is always the same: to get into Iran, to get into Syria, start a war. And it looks like they're proceeding with their other plan. We see ex-President Hadi. Well, he's preparing an offensive on the coast of Yemen. It looks like the Saudi supported president through the United States is making a last-ditch effort to try to seize control of Yemen. Now remember, China is coming in and they are working now with the new Houthi government, and it looks like that situation is falling apart. Ashton Carter is out there and he's saying even if we defeat the Islamic State in Iraq and in other countries, the U.S. has to stay in all these different countries in the Middle East. And of course they do, because they understand if they leave and the people actually take over the countries and they throw out the puppet governments, the petrodollar is doomed. That's the only reason they're staying in these countries. And we see this has nothing to do with the Islamic State. They just proved it. We see the U.S.-led coalition is actually collapsing right now. Denmark is pulling their F-16 jets out of the fight, and they're looking into the situation where on September 17th, a number of Syrian soldiers were killed with a U.S. bombing of these soldiers. And of course, the U.S. is out there saying this was actually a mistake. We didn't mean to do this. But again, the Islamic State, their terrorist groups were in there, and they knew exactly when to push forward. They knew not to be in the area. They knew a lot of information while these bombings were going on. And we're starting to see that the coalition forces, they're starting to break apart. Now, Lavrov is pushing the U.S. right now because Aleppo is basically done with right now. The U.S. terrorist organization, they have no chance whatsoever. So Lavrov and Kerry, they're getting together. Lavrov wants Kerry to admit that, yes, these are terrorist groups, and we'll have to see what comes out of this. Most of the time, the U.S. goes into these talks and they go back on their word with everything they discuss with Russia. So we'll have to see how this actually really turns out. While this is happening, we see the U.S. is deploying additional Marines and warships, and they are heading towards the Mediterranean. The U.S. Department of Defense said the Wasp and the Whidbey island ships left their bases in Virginia and North Carolina, and they have set course to the Mediterranean. And both of these ships, well, they have about 4,000 Marines, several AV-8B Harrier aircraft, the MV-22 Osprey support aircraft, and several types of helicopters. And we can see right now they're heading out into that area for 3 months. And the question is, what is their mission? What are they doing out there? We understand that Russia has its ships in the Mediterranean. Is this a cleanup operation, or is this an operation to advance whatever plan they have? And this is something that we need to watch. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.